The morning after my son was laid to rest, she put me out on the curb and said the house belonged to her now. At the reading of the will, she actually smiled. "Enjoy sleeping on the street, Eleanor." Then the attorney reached for a sealed envelope no one had mentioned. But let me take you back to the beginning, because sometimes justice doesn't rush in. Sometimes it waits quietly while people expose their true nature all on their own. The phone rang at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. David's voice was barely holding together, each word scraped from his lungs. "Mom, something's wrong, my chest." "I can't." The call dropped. By the time I arrived at the hospital, my son, 45 years old, strong, full of plans, was already gone. The doctor delivered the news like a routine report. Massive heart attack. No intervention possible. I stood frozen while Stephanie waited beside me, her expression carefully arranged into shock. Yet beneath it, I sensed something else. Not sorrow. Something lighter. Something relieved. I told myself grief was distorting my vision. "What happens now?" I asked, the words barely audible, my mind refusing to accept that my child no longer existed in the world. Stephanie squared her shoulders. For just a second, the mask slipped. "Now we face reality," she said. "David is gone, Eleanor. And I have choices to make." Her tone carried a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air. We had never been close, she and I, but David had always softened the distance between us. With him gone, that space widened into something dangerous. "We'll get through this together," I said, reaching for her hand. She stepped back. "We'll see." I ignored the warning hidden in her words, convincing myself that grief simply hardens some people instead of breaking them. The next 3 days blurred into funeral plans. I offered to help cover the costs. David was my only child, but Stephanie refused. "I'm his wife," she repeated. "I know what he wanted." So I focused on the eulogy, the phone calls, the exhausting work of staying upright. I was 67. I had buried my parents and my husband. Still, losing a child felt like falling into a pit with no bottom. The night before the service, I sat alone in David's old bedroom in the home he shared with Stephanie. My eyes drifted over framed memories, graduation day, their wedding, a Christmas photo with his nephew. One thing was missing. Any recent picture of David and me. Slowly, it dawned on me, they had been removed. All of them. I couldn't remember when it happened. A quiet knock broke the silence. Stephanie stood there, her gaze sharp, no longer pretending. "We need to talk, Eleanor." The funeral itself was flawless. Flowers arranged with precision. Hymns David loved. A reception planned down to the last detail. What turned my stomach was watching Stephanie perform grief while dropping comments about new beginnings and moving on. As I stood accepting condolences, I overheard her whispering to her sister behind the floral display. "The insurance alone covers the mortgage for 2 years," she said. "And without extra expenses?" "Extra expenses?" her sister asked. "What about Eleanor?" Stephanie laughed, brittle and thin. "That's not my concern anymore." Cold spread through me. I had lived with them for 2 years after selling my own home to help with their down payment. David had promised it was temporary. Somehow, temporary became routine. I cooked, cleaned, helped where I could. I thought I belonged. "Eleanor," Stephanie said sweetly, appearing at my side. "Can you come to the kitchen? We should talk." I followed her past grieving guests, exchanged hugs, said quiet goodbyes. Once the door closed, her voice changed. Calm. Detached. "I'll be honest. The house was in David's name. That makes it mine. I need space to grieve without complications." I steadied myself. "Complications? You living here doesn't work anymore. I need privacy." The words struck harder than any slap. "Stephanie, I know you're hurting, but surely we can." "No," she raised a hand. "I've decided. You have until tomorrow evening to pack." I searched her face for the woman who once called me mom, who hugged me at holidays, who cried when David proposed. She was gone. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. She shrugged. "You're an adult. You'll manage." The cruelty was effortless. "David would never." "David is dead," she said flatly. "The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." I packed my life into 4 suitcases and 2 boxes. 67 years reduced to what fit in a car trunk. As I folded clothes and wrapped the few photos she hadn't discarded, I kept waiting for footsteps on the stairs, for remorse, for an apology, for grief to finally crack her armor. Naturally, I believed she would at least allow me to stay until I found another place. She never did. Instead, at precisely 6 o'clock the following evening, she appeared in the doorway, arms folded like a final verdict. "Time's up, Eleanor." I closed the zipper on the last suitcase and took one final look around the room that had sheltered me for 2 years. Any trace of me was gone. The walls were empty, stripped back to neutrality. It no longer looked like a lived-in space, just a temporary room again. And perhaps that's all it had ever been. "I'll need a few more minutes to load the car," I said softly. "I'll help," she replied. Not as kindness. As enforcement. We carried my life out in 3 silent trips. When the last box was placed in my trunk, I turned toward her, hoping, foolishly, that something human might still surface. "I know you're angry with me," I said. "I wish I understood why. If I've done something wrong, I would fix it." Her face didn't change. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said flatly. "You just take up space. In my house. In my life. In my way. David pitted you. I don't." The truth landed clean and merciless. Somehow, it hurt less than pretending. I got into my car but rolled down the window. "Will there be a formal reading of David's will?" I asked. "I assume he left something." She frowned, genuinely confused. "Why would he leave you anything? You weren't his wife. And you never contributed financially." The irony was sharp enough to almost make me laugh. The $40,000 IUD given them for their down payment apparently no longer existed in her memory, or her conscience. "Of course," I said. "Silly of me." I drove away without looking back, heading for the Hampton Inn off Route 9, the only place I could afford while I figured out what came next. In the mirror, I saw her standing in the driveway until my car vanished from sight. The hotel room smelled like disinfectant and disappointment. I sat on the stiff bedspread and stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was a widow, now childless, without a home, and, according to the last family she had, disposable. And yet, beneath the grief, something stirred. Not hope exactly. Something sharper. Something alert. Stephanie believed she had won. She believed she had erased me and secured her future. What she didn't understand was that David had always been more thoughtful than she realized. 2 weeks later, with my savings thinning faster than my confidence, my phone rang. "Mrs. Fairfield, this is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates. I handled your son's legal matters." "Yes, Mr. Morrison," I said, recognizing the name immediately. "I'm calling to inform you that probate is complete. There will be a formal reading of David's will next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Your presence is required." "Required." I sat straighter. "I think there may be a mistake," I said carefully. Stephanie seemed to believe. "I can only speak to what the will states," he interrupted gently. "And it clearly lists you as a beneficiary." The line went dead, leaving the word echoing in my mind. David had remembered me. I assumed it would be something small, a keepsake, perhaps his father's watch, maybe old photo albums. Enough to acknowledge me, not enough to disrupt Stephanie's world. I spent the weekend searching for apartments. Senior communities. Modest 1-bedrooms. My finances could stretch a little longer if I was careful, but I would need to be precise. Very precise. The following Tuesday, at 1:45 p.m., I sat in the parking lot of Morrison & Associates as Stephanie arrived in a silver BMW, dressed in black that likely cost more than my monthly income. She wasn't alone. Her brother, Marcus, stepped out beside her, already glued to his phone. When I entered the waiting area, Stephanie's expression hardened instantly. "What is she doing here?" she snapped. "Mrs. Fairfield is here for the will reading," the receptionist replied calmly. "Which one?" Stephanie demanded. "Both," the young woman said. Marcus leaned in to whisper something. Stephanie stiffened and took a seat across from me, drawing a clear line in the room. At exactly 2 o'clock, Mr. Morrison appeared and guided us inside. He had kind eyes, silver hair, and the air of someone who still believed integrity mattered. "David was very deliberate," he began. "I'll read the will in full." Stephanie leaned forward eagerly. Marcus prepared his notes. I folded my hands and listened. As expected, Stephanie inherited the house, the vehicles, the retirement accounts, the insurance. She nodded along, satisfied. Then Mr. Morrison paused. "There is one final provision," he said, "added 3 months ago." The room changed. "To my mother, Eleanor Fairfield," he read, "who provided the down payment for our home and never requested repayment. I leave the contents of Safety Deposit Box E3, D7 at First National Bank, along with all associated documentation." "What safety deposit box?" Stephanie snapped. "It appears your husband maintained it privately," Mr. Morrison replied. "And he was very clear about who it belonged to." I was stunned. David had never mentioned it to me. "What's inside?" Marcus asked. "I don't know," Mr. Morrison said. "Only that Mrs. Fairfield has full access." Stephanie flushed with anger. "This should be contested." "You're welcome to try," Mr. Morrison said evenly. "But the language is explicit, and David was fully competent." "When was this added?" I asked. "February 15th, he said. The date struck me immediately. The day after Valentine's Day. The night David had been unusually quiet at dinner, watching, listening, deciding. Stephanie had been complaining about something, the neighbor's dog, I think. And David had barely spoken throughout the meal. "This is a waste of time," Stephanie snapped, standing abruptly. "Marcus, let's go. We'll file a challenge tomorrow." "Actually," Mr. Morrison said, pulling out another document. "Before you leave, I need to inform you both that David left specific instructions for his mother regarding the contents of the safety deposit box. Mrs. Fairfield, he wanted you to access it within the next few days once you completed the necessary documentation with the bank." He handed me a sealed envelope. "These are the bank documents and his personal key. The bank will need to verify the death certificate and process the paperwork before you can access the box. Usually takes about 3 business days." Stephanie's eyes fixed on the envelope in my hands like a hawk watching a mouse. "I'm coming with you to the bank." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Mr. Morrison interjected. "The safety deposit box access is restricted to Mrs. Eleanor Fairfield only. Bank policy." "This is insane," Stephanie sputtered. "How do we even know there's anything valuable in there? It could be empty or just sentimental junk." I stood up, clutching the envelope. "I suppose we'll find out next week." As we filed out of the office, I could feel Stephanie's eyes boring into my back. In the parking lot, she cornered me beside my car. "Eleanor, let's be reasonable about this. Whatever's in that box, we should share it." David would have wanted his wife to benefit from anything he left behind. For the first time since David's death, I almost smiled. "You made it very clear that you don't believe David would have left me anything. Now suddenly you're concerned about sharing." "I'm just saying you re-saying whatever you think will get you access to that safety deposit box." I unlocked my car door, but David was very specific. "The contents are mine." Her mask slipped completely then, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Don't forget, Eleanor, you're homeless. You need my goodwill more than I need yours." I paused with my hand on the car door. "Actually, Stephanie, I don't think I need anything from you at all." 3 business days later, after providing the death certificate and completing the bank's paperwork, I finally stood before Safety Deposit Boxer 3537 at First National Bank. The bank manager, Mrs. Peterson, was expecting me. She'd obviously been briefed about the situation because she offered her condolences and escorted me personally to the vault area. "Box 337 is one of our larger units," she explained as we walked through the security doors. "Your son rented it about 5 years ago and visited quite regularly." 5 years? David had been planning something for 5 years. Mrs. Peterson used her master key while I inserted David's key, and the box slid out smoothly. It was indeed large, about the size of a briefcase, and surprisingly heavy. "Take all the time you need," Mrs. Peterson said, showing me to a private viewing room. "I'll be at my desk when you're finished." Alone in the small, windowless room, I lifted the lid of the safety deposit box. The first thing I saw was a letter addressed to me in David's familiar handwriting. My fingers shook as I unfolded the letter. "Mom," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm no longer here. And Stephanie has likely already revealed exactly who she is." The words hit harder than I expected. "I'm sorry you had to experience that, but I'm not shocked. I've understood the truth about my marriage for a long time, and I prepared for this outcome." My pulse quickened as I kept reading. "You gave us $40,000 for the down payment on the house. I know you viewed it as a loan, even though you never once asked to be repaid. For the past 5 years, I've invested that money. Quietly. Consistently. Whenever I could, I added more. What you find in the account's ISNT simply repayment. It's just what patience and planning turned it into." I lowered the letter, my hands unsteady, and looked at what lay beneath it. Statements. Account summaries. Portfolio breakdowns. My eyes skimmed the figures again and again, struggling to accept them. $185,000. Spread across multiple investment accounts. Every single one in my name. I picked the letter back up, my heart pounding. I also know Stephanie tells people you contribute nothing. What she leaves out is that the mortgage has always been paid automatically from my salary account during the entire time you lived with us. Any money you gave us went straight into investments meant for your future. I've kept records of everything, Mom, emails, texts, offhand remarks. You'll find them in the folder marked documentation. I wanted you to see the truth for yourself. My vision blurred as I reached for the folder. Inside were printed emails, screenshots of messages, copies of statements, years of quiet proof. Patterns I hadn't wanted to see. Intentions I'd sensed but never confirmed. The final lines broke what composure I had left. You deserve far more than the way you've been treated. Take this and build a life where no one can ever make you feel like a burden again. And Mom, don't tell Stephanie any of this until you're safely away from her. Please trust me. All my love, David. I sat there for nearly an hour, absorbing every page David had left behind. By the time I stood up, grief had given way to clarity. Mrs. Peterson helped organize the paperwork and explained how to access the accounts. Everything was ready. Everything was deliberate. As I walked toward my car, my phone rang. Eleanor, Stephanie said, her voice coated in sweetness. I was thinking you might come by for lunch. We can talk about what you found in the safety deposit box. I caught my reflection in the car window, and smiled. That's very kind of you, I replied. I'll be there at noon. It was time for her to learn that those she dismissed were never as powerless as she believed. I arrived exactly at 12, carrying a small gift bag and a carefully neutral expression. She opened the door wearing a flowing white dress that likely cost more than my entire hotel stay. All warmth. All charm. Eleanor, I'm so glad you came. I made your favorite chicken salad. Interesting how memory improves when leverage is needed. The table was set with wedding china and fresh flowers, an obvious performance. She poured iced tea and chatted about the weather, circling the real subject like a patient predator. Finally, she sat back. I've been thinking about the safety deposit box. Have you? I have, I said calmly. I know things have been strained, she continued. But David would want us united. Family needs to support one another. Family. Coming from the woman who had pushed me onto the street. I agree completely, I said evenly. Her eyes brightened. I'm so relieved. I was worried you might still be upset about leaving so suddenly. But I knew you'd understand I needed space to grieve. Of course, I said, taking a bite of the salad. Grief changes people. Yes, exactly. She leaned forward, energized. So I was thinking, whatever David left you, perhaps we combine it with the insurance. Pool our resources. Invest together. I have excellent advisors. She smiled, confident. She had no idea the ground beneath her was already shifting. I'm sure you do, I thought, the same advisors who never questioned her taste for reckless spending. That's very considerate, Stephanie, I said aloud. But I'm curious. What makes you so certain there was anything of value in that safety deposit box? She hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Well, David was always private about certain finances. He must have had a reason for keeping things separate. Private, I repeated lightly. An interesting word choice. You know what I mean, she said with a dismissive flick of her hand. Men and money. They never tell their wives everything. I set my fork down and met her eyes. Actually, Stephanie, I think David told you exactly what he believed you needed to know. Something shifted in her expression, uncertainty, maybe even a flicker of alarm. So, she asked carefully, what was in the box, Eleanor? We were close now. But I wasn't ready to finish it just yet. Instead, I reached for the gift bag. I brought you something, I said, lifting out the small wrapped box. Just a token of appreciation. She opened it quickly. Inside was a framed photo of David on his college graduation day. Her features softened. Oh, Eleanor, this is beautiful. Thank you. I thought you should have it, I said calmly. After all, you were such a devoted wife. The emphasis didn't slip past her. She looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing at all, I replied. Just acknowledging how well you cared for my son. She set the frame down with care, but the warmth drained from her face. The performance was cracking. You're being evasive, she said. Just tell me what was in the safety deposit box. I smiled and sipped my tea. Mostly paperwork. Fascinating reading, really. Her voice tightened. What kind of paperwork? Financial records. Investment summaries. Correspondence. I paused. Quite a collection of printed emails and text messages. The color left her face. Text messages? David was very thorough, I said pleasantly. Especially toward the end. I opened my phone and scrolled. Would you like to see one? This is from about 6 months ago. I turned the screen toward her. The message to her sister was unmistakable. I can't wait until that old bat is gone. Then I'm turning her room into a home gym. Stephanie reached for the phone. I withdrew it smoothly. There are many more, I added. David was meticulous. This one here is especially interesting, where you tell Marcus how you convinced David I should help with expenses, even though the mortgage was already paid from his salary. Stop, she whispered. And then there's the email, I continued, unhurried, where you laugh about how easy it was to make me feel like a burden. How convenient it would be to remove me once David was gone. I set the phone down and studied her face. That was strategic of you. Planning my removal while your husband was still alive. Her composure finally collapsed. He had no right to save my private messages. He had every right, I said quietly. It was his home. And you were discussing his mother. I leaned back in my chair. So the real question is, what happens next? Her eyes hardened. What do you want? Want? I repeated. I've never wanted anything from you. Then why do this? She demanded. Why humiliate me? I considered her question carefully. You're right. There's no need for me to humiliate you. You managed that on your own. She shook her head. I don't understand. You threw me out the day after my son's funeral, I said evenly. You told me I was useless. That David only pitted me. That I added nothing to your household. I rose slowly from my chair, my voice steady, grounded, awake. But this is what you never grasped about David. He noticed everything. Every sharp remark. Every quiet scheme. Every carefully placed lie. Stephanie's hands clenched the edge of the table now, her knuckles drained of color. And here's the remarkable part, I continued calmly. He recorded it all. Not out of spite. Not for revenge. He did it to shield me. Because he understood that once he was gone, you wouldn't bother pretending anymore. You can't prove any of this would stand up in court, she snapped. Court. I laughed softly, surprising even myself. Oh, Stephanie. I'm not taking you to court. She blinked, thrown off balance. You're not? Why would I? I said evenly. You've already handed me everything. Her voice faltered. I don't know what you're talking about. I reached into my bag and placed the thick folder from the safety deposit box between us. David's final insurance policy. He left me far more than a few screenshots, I said. 5 years of records. 5 years of proof showing exactly how you managed both of us. Her eyes locked onto the folder as if it were dangerous. Bank statements, I continued, confirming the mortgage was paid directly from David's salary the entire time I lived in that house. Emails between you and Marcus strategizing how to handle me. Credit card records showing luxury purchases on the very days you told David we couldn't afford groceries or repairs. Her breathing grew shallow. He even kept copies of messages you sent your friends, I added gently, mocking him for being too soft, laughing about how easily you convinced him I was a burden. That one landed. She recoiled as though struck. And do you know what I found most revealing? I asked, opening the folder. This exchange where you and Marcus discuss a long-term plan to declare me mentally unfit, so you could gain access to my pension and social security. That's not, we never, she stammered. No, I said calmly. You never finished it. Her eyes widened. Why not? Because David figured it out, I replied. And he intervened. She stared at me. Intervened how? You don't have anything worth protecting. Don't I? I smiled, almost kindly. That's interesting, because these investment statements suggest otherwise. I tapped the page lightly. Money David had been growing quietly for 5 years. That's impossible, she whispered. You're staying in a hotel. I'm staying in a hotel because I chose to, I said. Not because I have to. The silence stretched between us, thick and calculating. I could almost hear her mind racing, numbers forming, sums adding up, finally realizing just how badly she had misjudged the situation. How much? She asked at last. How much did David leave you? I closed the folder and rose to my feet. That's not something you're entitled to know. Her eyes flashed. I am entitled. I was his wife. And you received exactly what a wife was owed, I replied calmly. The house. The vehicles. The insurance. His retirement accounts. By any measure, you were well provided for. She stood abruptly, her chair shrieking against the floor. You manipulative old woman. You're trying to take what belongs to me. I lifted an eyebrow. Take? Tell me, how does one steal what was legally and intentionally given to them? David was free to distribute his assets as he chose. He was my husband. Yes, I said evenly. And apparently he understood precisely who he was married to. The words lingered between us, heavy and unmoving. Her face burned red, rage tangled with something closer to fear. I want to see the bank statements, she demanded. I'm sure you do, I replied. But no. She stepped closer. I'm warning you, you're warning me? I laughed softly, surprised by how light I felt. Stephanie, you evicted me. You mocked me at my son's funeral. You told me I was useless, unwanted, invisible. What leverage do you imagine you still have? She studied me, reassessing. When anger failed, she reached for desperation. "Eleanor, please," she said, her voice suddenly gentle. "I haven't been myself since David died. I was grieving. I said things I didn't mean. We're family. We should handle this together." "Family," I repeated slowly. "Yes. You said that just after informing me David pitted me and that I never contributed anything to your home." "I didn't mean it," she insisted. I was emotional. "But you did mean it," I replied. "That's why David's records matter. He saved you repeating those same sentiments, to different people, over many years." Her expression faltered. "What do you want from me? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for asking you to leave. I'm sorry for everything. Can we now talk about the money like adults? There's nothing to discuss." "Of course there is," she pressed. "If David left you a large sum, it needs to be managed properly. I know excellent advisors. I could help." "You mean you could control it?" I said quietly. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." I picked up my purse. "Let me make one thing perfectly clear. What David left me wasn't a windfall. It wasn't luck. It was the return on the $40,000 I gave you for your down payment, money invested carefully for 5 years. Her mouth fell open. "40,000? David said it was a family contribution." "He said that to spare your pride," I replied. "And mine. But he never forgot it was a loan." I watched the realization settle in, slow, unwelcome, irreversible, as she finally understood how completely she had misjudged both of us. "If you invested $40,000 5 years ago," she whispered, "and David was growing it, how much is it worth now?" I took out my phone and opened the banking app the clerk had helped me set up earlier. The number glowed on the screen. I turned it toward her. $185,000. The color drained from her face. She grabbed the table as if the room had tilted. "That's not possible." "David was cautious," I said calmly. "And very determined that his mother would never be left unprotected." Her voice shook. "That's almost as much as the life insurance." "Yes," I replied. "It is." "That money should be part of the estate," she said quickly. "It should be divided." "Based on what law?" I asked. "Or what moral argument?" "I was his wife," she snapped. "And you were just his mother." Those words landed hard. Just his mother. For a moment, I felt the echo of pain, then something steadier replaced it. "You're right," I said quietly. "I am just his mother. The woman who carried him, raised him, stood by him through college, and loaned him the money that helped buy the house you expelled me from." I stood and slipped my purse over my shoulder. And apparently, that was enough for David to ensure I'd never need anyone's mercy again. "Wait," she called out, panic breaking through. "Eleanor, please. We can fix this. Sit down. Let's talk." I paused at the doorway and turned back. "What exactly do you believe needs fixing?" "The money," she said quickly. "Us. Everything. I made mistakes. I was under stress. David's death terrified me." I lashed out. "But we can still make this right." "I'm sure you were worried about money," I said softly. "Just not for the reasons you're claiming." "What does that mean?" I reached into David's folder and pulled out the final document, the one I'd saved for last. "It means David also tracked your spending, including the $15,000 you charged in the month before he died." Her face went ashen. "Spa appointments. Designer clothes. A weekend in New York," I continued. "All while telling David you were afraid you couldn't afford groceries." "That's not, you weren't worried," I said. "You were planning. Counting on the insurance. Removing the inconvenient mother-in-law who might interfere." She collapsed back into her chair, the fight draining from her body. "You don't understand the pressure I was under," she whispered. "Everyone expected perfection, David's colleagues, the neighbors, my family. Keeping up appearances is exhausting." I looked at her, draped in luxury, seated in a beautiful home, surrounded by everything she'd ever wanted. "No," I said evenly. "I don't understand. I was too busy actually caring for your husband while you spent his money. I loved David. You loved what David provided. Those are not the same thing." She cried then, messy, uncontrolled tears streaking her flawless makeup. "I can't lose everything," she sobbed. "I can't go back to being nobody." "You aren't nobody," I said. "You're David's widow. You inherited a valuable home, a substantial insurance policy, and his retirement accounts. You're secure, if you're careful. But it's not the life I planned." "Then perhaps," I said gently, "you planned the wrong life." I turned for the door again. This time, she didn't stop me. A dull sound followed, a body slumping forward. I turned back, alarm flaring for just a second. She wasn't ill. She was defeated. The moment when charm, cruelty, and manipulation finally fail, and nothing is left to bargain with. "I can't," she whispered. "You aren't losing everything," I said. You're only losing what was never yours. I left her there, surrounded by fine china and carefully curated illusions, and stepped into the sunlight of my own beginning. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it simply arrives on time. And sometimes, if grace allows, it comes with financial freedom, and the quiet certainty that the child you raised became exactly the person you hoped he would be. David had taken care of me. Just as he always promised. Even from beyond this world, my son kept his word. And that, far more than any number on a screen, was the greatest inheritance of all.